Hey everyone, today I'm doing a deck tech on a deck I actually made pretty recently. I'm still getting the cards in paper, uh, but I wanted to make a friendly sort of budget, sort of not kind of deck. It's about 150 in paper at the moment, but the general idea is kind of being more of a group hug and kind of a politics deck. So a lot of the cards are not going to be good necessarily, but they are going to be fun. And there is one format it is good at, and that is Kingdom. And you have one person who's the king, and they have to, try to win the game or not lose it by killing everyone else. And they have like other people with hidden roles. And so this whole point is supposed to be you are the king. You give benefits to people for helping you. That could also mean that you're helping someone who's trying to kill you. But the more they help you, the more that you would help them, and vice versa. And it is a very group huggy, like everyone. Let's draw a card, let's ramp, let's do some fun stuff. So I'll get into the commander first, and then you can kind of see what my thought process was for this deck. So it is Kenrith the Return King. He he actually is really great for this deck because of all of his abilities, allowing you to choose any player or creature or um, whatever you want, including your opponent's stuff to benefit them. So the whole point is, I can give, well, let's go over his abilities first. He's 5 mana for a 5/5. For a legendary creature, Human Noble, you can pay 1 red to give all creatures trample and haste until end of turn. And so this does all creatures, so even your opponent's creatures during your turn would get haste. It can be kind of weird because it doesn't say a player's, because you could end up getting, like, let's say you're going up against a Krenko, you could actually make them activate their ability that turn if they didn't have it already. But the main point is that you want to use it so that as soon as someone's ready to attack, they can say, I'll play this big creature to kill an opponent who's about to combo off, and then you give it haste until end of turn. 2 mana, 1 and a green. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. There is an ability in the deck that works super well with this, but for the most part, you're really not doing it on your opponent's stuff unless you want very specific things to happen. Um, and if you want to get a favor, I guess, like get that little bit of commander damage or just plain old damage, or maybe some infect someone out with it. Um, there's 2 and a white. Target player gains 5 life. So you're probably going to be using this on yourself for the most part. Sometimes, usually you're getting like 10 life a turn with him. It's not necessarily an ability you want to be using because it doesn't give you an advantage. There are a few cards that deal with gaining life, not necessarily the life gain, but your life total. So he can be pretty helpful with that. 4 mana, target player draws a card. It's just a good ability. I mean, just draw a card. You're probably not using this on an opponent. I don't really see the reason why you would use it on an opponent, even in this deck, but it is there if you want it. Maybe they're gonna mill out. Maybe you like, oh, I'll draw my entire deck except for 1 card, and then you're like, oh, draw 2, and then kill them. 5 mana, you can put a creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. This is pretty good, especially since there might be other opponents with cards you want back, and you can give them haste too. So for 6 mana, you can return their creature, give it haste, and that might be what they need. Like, oh, I'll give you a Crater Hoof, and you kill my opponent for me. So for the most part, all of his abilities are really well for the deck. He might be a little bit overused simply because he is one of the 5 color commanders where you can just pump a bunch of mana into his abilities. That the deck does have ways to pump a bunch of mana in, but usually they are very group huggy, and it's not a very selfish deck. Most Kenrith decks that I have seen, at least, usually tend to be selfish, and most group hugs don't usually run black. And this deck doesn't run too much of it, but it does run a little bit because it is more of a political deck with group hug in it. So we'll go to the first, I guess you could say, like cycle of cards almost. This will be the only complete one. The other ones usually are missing a card or two. So this has demonstrate. So each one of the 5 cards I'm about to show you for back to class are going to have demonstrate. And the whole point of that is you cast it. once, then you can let an opponent copy it, and if they do, you get to do it again. So, Excavation Technique lets you, for 4 mana, destroy target non-land permanent. Its controller creates 2 treasures, and then you give an opponent that ability, and you get another one. Um, Replication Technique is the same. Create a token that's a copy of target permanent you control. So for 5 mana, you create a permanent. It could even be a land if you really desperately need to ramp, but there's better permanents in the deck to copy, though I wouldn't blame you for copying a land. Sometimes we're desperate, you know? And you get another opponent that ability. Maybe they only have lands. I mean, that could actually be really good. Someone just board wiped. You make a copy of a permanent you just played, and then give them a land, and you get another permanent. Incarnation Technique is pretty good. So you mill 5 and return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Much like Kenrith's ability, but because of Demonstrate, you can copy it again, and you can help out an opponent, giving them a card that they might need without having to use your mana to do so from Kenrith. Creative Technique, you shuffle your library and then reveal cards until you get a non-land, and then you exile. It's basically Cascade without, the number mattering, but you do need to shuffle your library first. You can let an opponent do that. If they are a low to the ground or tribal deck, it's very low risk to let them do it, and you might make a friend maybe. I don't know. With most of these demonstrate cards, you probably can. Healing Technique, it can be funny if your opponent doesn't have a graveyard because they don't have a target to return. Um, and you get to return 2 permanents and gain a bunch of life. A lot of times, um, and you do have to exile Technique because you can't just keep redoing it. Otherwise, well, yeah, that'd be broken. Um, so now we are going on to the next part, which is offerings. So these are cards that I do something. Uh, I get to do 2 things, and I can make an opponent do both of those, or I can make 2 opponents do one of those. So, Benevolent Offering is 4 mana. An opponent and I get to make 3 1/1 white spirit tokens with flying onto the battlefield. And then I choose an opponent, and I get to gain 2 life for each creature I control. Infernal Offering is me and an opponent can sacrifice a creature. Each one of us that does draws 2 cards. And then I choose another opponent, and each of us return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. So it does have a bit of graveyard recursion. Is it does deck does well, okay, this deck does not play that many creatures, about maybe 19, 20, I think. So these abilities might not be the best, but at the same time, if someone is board wiping a lot, it is good to at least restabilize, and sometimes you can get Kenrith back. Um, Volcanic Offering. This is a deck, or this is a card I almost didn't want to put in it because it says destroy target non-basic land I don't control, and then the opponent gets to choose another non-basic land I don't control and destroy it. I don't like running this sometimes just because it could feel kind of mean, and a lot of times, there aren't that many choices on the battlefield. For the most part, you're just really doing it for 5 mana. Remove a creature and then remove a second creature an opponent wants to remove, because of the second ability, which is dealing 7 damage to a creature you don't control, and an opponent gets to do the same to a creature you don't control. And that's the most important part, is that they're not hurting you from this card. Sylvan Offering. This is the X spell. I think this might be one of the few X spells in the deck, but it is definitely one of my favorites. I get to choose an opponent, or I guess you do too, if you're playing this deck. We choose an opponent. You and that opponent create an XX green treefolk creature token. And then you choose another opponent. They create that many elves, and so do you. So usually you just pump a bunch of mana into this, make a big board, and the guy who didn't get anything probably feels pretty bad after this because 3 of his opponents just made a billion tokens for just your bit of mana. And you can give them all haste too, with Kenrith's ability if he's on the battlefield. Temporal Reflections. So this lets you put a copy of a creature you control onto the battlefield, and then, well, I guess I should go over Tempting Offer. So there's only 2 of them in the deck, and Tempting Offer is a card where each opponent gets to choose to copy it, basically, that ability. So you do it once, and then each opponent can do it, And for each opponent who does do it as well, you get to do it again. So if one opponent chooses to create a token of a creature they control, um, you could do it again. Actually, they get to get a copy of that creature. So I choose like Metallic Mimic or something. I'm just gonna say a card. It's not even in the deck. But I make a copy of it. An opponent can make a copy of it. But if they make a copy of it, I make another copy of it, and then so on and so forth until everyone's done it. Template Discovery is actually really good in this deck. For the most part, you are wanting to get Maze's End, and we'll go over that later on. Because this lets you search for any land put on the battlefield. It doesn't even have to be tapped. But most of our lands are tapped. I think our only untapped lands are like we have one non-basic untapped land, and the rest are basic. But you'll see why. And we have gates, and so you're going to be searching your library, very much like how they get to choose a creature on the last card. If they choose to search for a land card and put it on the battlefield, you do it for each time they do it. So I've cast this for 4 mana sometimes, and I've gotten like 5 or 6 mana from it because if one opponent can do this on some decks, you can just make a bunch of mana. For the most part, that's not really what we're trying to do. We're not trying to be too unfair with this. This is just um, a nice ramp card that's also going to search for some of our key winning pieces if the game's going too long, or just ramp in general. Um, so we have Dictate of Krufix and Dictate of Karametra. So these both flash in, and I call this small hugs because you're kind of helping them out, but you help yourself out first. So at the beginning of your of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card, and so you're usually playing both of these at the end step of your last opponent until it's your turn, because then Dictate of Krufix goes off, you draw 2 cards on your turn. Dictate of Karametra goes off, and now you have double mana. Karametra might get removed because of the fact that it's a 5 mana flash spell that is going to double your mana on your turn, and a lot of opponents are probably going to be scared of that, even though this deck is honestly not even a really scary deck. We have Well of Ideas. Enters the battlefield, this is big hugs because you're really helping out your opponents a lot with this for the most part. There's no unfair thing, like not unfair, but there's no super benefit to you that your opponents don't get. But for the most part, you are hugging. You're trying to get a bunch of mana and do a bunch of things. So this actually, and draw a bunch of cards. So this actually does work. So Well of Ideas, it is like Crewfix, except it enters the battlefield. You draw 2. You have to play it at sorcery speed. At the beginning of each draw step, that isn't yours, that player draws an additional card, and your draw step, you draw 2. So they're drawing 1, you're drawing 2, and it enters the battlefield and you draw 2. But it is a 6 mana investment, which is a lot, which is why we're trying to ramp so much, even if it is helping our opponents. We have Rites of Flourishing at the beginning of each draw step. Everyone draws an additional card during their draw step, and each player can play additional land on their turns. So for the most part, we do get the land ability first before anyone else, but they do get the draw, which is way more beneficial in a lot of cases. Um, this is called You Scratch My Back, I'll Scratch Yours. So for the most part, these ones are I benefit you and you benefit me. So Root Weaver, Druid, enters the battlefield. Each opponent may search their library for up to 3 basics. Um, they put one of those onto the battlefield tapped under your control, and the rest onto the battlefield tapped under their control. And then they shuffle their library. So you play it for 3 mana. If each of your opponents goes and gives you a ramp spell, how it really works is each opponent ramps 2 and you ramp 3. So that's not really that big of a benefit. So it is actually in everyone's benefit to ramp, because in reality, like if one person takes the offer, um, it's not that great for us. If everyone takes the offer, it's okay for us. And so they're not incentivized to try to betray us on this. They actually really want those lands because they'll be untapped during their turn. So this Root Weaver really helps out our opponents, but that also makes them all a threat to each other, and we benefit a little bit more than they do. But we really want, and we're a 5 color deck, so we're fine with whatever lands they're gonna give us. This isn't exactly a card you want to keep if you're not good on colors, because your opponents could choose to give you colors you already have and not give you black or red that you need. Um, Shadrix Silverquill, I did it. Um, 2/5 flyer, legendary creature, Elder Dragon with flying and double strike. Beginning of, did I already say that? Whatever. At the beginning of combat on my turn, I can choose two. Each mode must target a different player. So usually you're choosing yourself and someone else. Target player creates a 2/1 white-black Inkling creature token with flying. Target player draws a card and loses one life. Or target player puts a 1/1 counter on each creature they control. So usually you're probably going to give yourself the card draw and someone a 2/1 flying. And if you really like someone, or even if you really want to get that last bit of damage in, putting a counter on each creature that player controls. So this can be pretty nice. It can make you a friend. It can make someone even look more like a threat that needs to be dealt with. And maybe make that threat like you. You can make a deal. Don't attack me. I'll give you a counter on each creature you control. Or don't attack me. I'll draw you a card. Or make you a creature. Something that you want to do. And each mode does need to target a different player, and you can only choose two. So you can't do three modes. You can't uh, choose yourself twice because obviously this card would be busted. Maybe not even busted, but just pretty good. Um, because these cards aren't necessarily really good actually. Uh, Dawnbreak Reclaimer. So for the most part, it's a flying angel for 6 mana. It's a 5/5, and you choose a creature in opponent's graveyard first. Then they choose a creature card in your graveyard, and then you can choose if you like that deal to put them both back. If not, um, then nothing happens. It's just a 6 mana 5/5 flyer. Um, it's okay. It is kind of a cool and interesting concept. And you really want to talk to your opponent before you start picking these because uh, you don't want to get a bad deal and then your opponent feels bad, you feel bad, and now you just spent 6 mana on a 5/5 flyer that does nothing and makes you and your opponent feel bad. You usually want to make a deal with this card. So no more scratch your backs, you scratch mines. Humble Defector. So this is a card that can be kind of risky. So you tap it to draw two cards, and opponent gains control of it. Activate this only during your turn. And it's a 2 mana 2/1 creature that's a human rogue. And so the most part, what you're really wanting to do is, I give this to you, you'll give it back, right? And I'll give it to someone else, they give it back. I give it to you, you give it back, over and over and over again. Obviously, it's not going to survive all the time because of board wipes, state effects that might kill it, things like that. And people might even attack with it. They might not want it. Um, so there's that. So I'm really testing it out. I'm seeing how it goes. It depends on the play group for the most part, how they play around it. A lot of times I'm probably just gonna use it, draw two cards, and I'll be ahead, and everyone else is probably because it would take a couple, like a one pass around for someone to really get like your opponents to really use this against you. Hunted Dragon is a 6 mana flying haste dragon, or a 5 mana 6/6 with flying and haste, and then when it enters the battlefield, an opponent puts 3/2/2 knights with first strike onto the battlefield. So what you really want to be doing with this is you make a big dragon, maybe for a blocker for the most part, or even to get a last bit of damage in against someone, and you make some tokens for them to block with as well. There's even ways you'll see later on where maybe you want to make your opponents gain this, and then say, hey, I'll give you guys all a dragon if you give me all those knights. Uh, that is a thing you could do. Probably wouldn't be good because now you have a bunch of 6/6 flyers trying to kill you. But it is a thing you could do. And then we have Pendant of Prosperity. And there's the battlefield under the opponent's control. They tap 2 mana, uh, they tap 2 mana and tap it, draw a card, and put a land on from their hand onto the battlefield. And then you get to do the same because you are its owner. So so they get to draw a card, you get to draw a card, you get to put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, they get to put a land from their hand onto the battlefield, or you do. Um, so usually you want to give this to someone who's having a harder time keeping up with everything in card draw or ramp, and then while they're benefiting from it, you are too. You won't be benefiting in a broken way, so they probably will trust you enough to let you do that. I don't know why I put my mouse there. I was trying not to do that the entire time, but I did. Whew, okay, we got Druid of Purification. So, these cards will give your opponent a choice. The choice of removing something or uh, what you really want to do with the card. So, Druid of Purification is a 2/3 human druid. for 4 mana. Enters the battlefield. You choose an artifact or enchantment you don't control, and each opponent gets to do the same. And then you get to destroy each permanent chosen that way. So no matter what, 4 mana, 2/3 that destroys an artifact or enchantment is good. And if opponent really wants to make a deal with you, you get to destroy 2. And so for 4 mana, that's actually not too bad. It could even go to 3, and if you're really lucky, 4. But that's very rare, and I guess that would happen if 3 people chose an artifact and enchantment deck to do that against, and then that person just wanted to get a free removal anyways. Magister of Worth is a 6 mana 4/4 flying angel. When it enters the battlefield, starting with you, each opponent votes for Grace or Condemnation. If Grace gets more votes, each player returns all their creatures from their graveyard to the battlefield. If Condemnation gets more votes or is tied, destroy all other creatures. So this could probably be a board wipe in most cases. Like if you and another opponent are really low on the board and want to board wipe real quick, this is really good. If everyone's already been board wiped, you have a bunch of creatures in your graveyard you want, they have a bunch of creatures in their graveyard they want. If one person is the only one or less who votes for it, then you're good. And this isn't a 4-player mode. It does change a lot more, and like voting, like the tying on votes is a lot less relevant in 5 player since there are less people, since it's an odd number and there's not really going to be a tie. Um, yeah, I don't think there's any way to tie. So Council's Judgment. Will of the Council. Starting with you, each player votes for a non-land permanent you don't control, and you exile each permanent with the most votes or tied. So if it's a 4-player game, you can work together, say, hey, let's both vote for this guy's thing. You two can vote for something else, and you can get 2 cards removed for 3 mana, or you could just remove that card for just one thing for 3 mana, and it's permanent removal. It doesn't go away. It's on an enchantment, so this is really good. So we have counter offers. So for the most part, these are our counter spells. They're just really what we want to do for, we just want to get rid of that spell as much as we can. So we have Arcane Denial. We get to counter a spell, and its controller draws 2 at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and we draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So for the most part, we're giving them 2 cards, we're getting 1 card, and we're countering their spell. That might be, a removal or something pretty risky. Um, Split Decision, it's another vote card. You can either vote for Denial or Duplication. Denial getting more votes will counter the spell. If Duplication gets tied or has more votes, you copy the spell and choose new copies. So 2 mana, usually the person will, if it's a 4-player game, you could choose like a ramp spell, right? And like you could say, hey, I'll duplicate your ramp spell if you vote for duplication, where if you don't vote for duplication, I'll counter it. So you can counter a spell that you want. Maybe it's a ramp spell. Maybe it's the other way around, where instead um, we need to get rid of this card he's about to combo off, and then you and the other teammates or opponents or whatever vote for counterspell. You want to get rid of it. It's not helping you. It's gonna kill you. So obviously it's a 2 mana counterspell. Uh, and then we have Tybalt's Trickery. Counter a spell, choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards, exiles the top card of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name, and they cast that without paying its mana cost. And then they put the rest of the cards in the bottom of at the bottom of their library in a random order. So it's just, oh, I'm about to play something big, or same thing, combo piece. You counter it, and then they get something different. Sometimes it could be a counter spell. Like I've seen Tybalt Trickery get a counter spell where they can't cast it, so they put it away basically because there's an empty stack after Tybalt Trickery resolves. So it's a pretty fun spell. It could be broken in certain formats, but we're really playing this more as a fun counter spell that isn't too harsh on the opponent unless they're a control deck. Which at that point, I'm pretty sure everyone else at the table is probably going to be pretty happy that you did that. So this is removal. So it's not really removal, but it's our best removal in a lot of cases. And the removal cards themselves aren't terrible. They're just not great. They're not getting you card advantage. So Oblation. I don't know what it is really, but 3 mana, 2 white, instant. The owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into their library, then draws 2. So you're one for threeing yourself. You're getting rid of a card from your hand and then shuffling a non-land permanent into their library, and they draw two. But it's also like maybe that's their big spell that costs them like a whole turn, or they cast for a couple cards, or it could be anything. As if it could even be a combo piece. Like I would rather have them draw two cards and me lose a card than lose the game because obviously that's a big deal. Wrong turn. Target opponent gains control of another target creature. So or target opponent gets that another player's creature. So I guess actually you could target their own creature with it. It doesn't really matter, but it's well, it would be a weird thing. But for the most part, like okay, well this guy has a Golos or something, which isn't in the format anymore, but this guy can't use it. But Golos is really threatening under his control. So I give him a Golos, and he's happy because he now has Golos. The other guy's not happy because he got removed, but I didn't really remove it. I just gave it to someone else. So this is probably our second best removal because Chaos Warp is, 3 mana instant. So these are all instants, 3 mana, very weird, but they're all very similar in being not great in a way. So the owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, they put it onto the battlefield. So kind of like Tybalt's Trickery, back here, your main goal is to give them something random for like something big they might have or something that's really important. And this can affect lands. Of course, if they're an instant or sorcery deck, a lot of times this could just be a 3 mana removal for anything. And it does happen in regular decks too. So it depends on what you're getting. They don't get to cast it, so it's not a non-land permanent. It's a permanent, or um, it's not a card you get to cast. It's a non-land permanent. So the other card was any card as long as it's not a land, and this one has to be a permanent. So we'll go over to starting an arms race. That sounds a little bit more crazy than it really is. For the most part, you're just trying to get your opponents to attack each other and then benefit from attacking your opponents as well. So Belby, Corrupted Observer, legendary creature, zombie elf, for a black and a green. At the beginning of each player's pre-combat or post-combat main phase, they add 2 colorless mana for each opponent, for each of our opponents who lost life this turn. So we can get up to 6 mana from this. Our opponents can get up to 4, and they have to attack each other. So this is very great for ramping our opponents in a way that one makes them want to attack each other and not us for that early bits of damage, and that might add up. Um, and then we have Edric, Spy, Master of Trest. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller draws a card. So this is very, very helpful for token decks, and for the most part, we're going to be drawing a little bit from him. Um, but we definitely want our opponents thinking, yes, I want to, attack my opponent, draw 70 cards, then discard down to 7 or something. Maybe they'll have maximum hand size. It doesn't really matter, but we really want our opponents to hurt each other for the most part. And then we have a big dinosaur guy, who's not a dinosaur, he's a beast, but he looks like one. Um, Gahiji, Honored One. He's a legendary creature beast, so these are all legendaries, so copying them is not really an option unless you want them in your graveyard for some reason. When a creature attacks one of your opponents or a planeswalker an opponent controls, that creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So for the most part, you benefit your opponents for attacking each other, no benefits for your opponents for not attacking each other, and you get a benefit for attacking them for the cost of just, 5 mana 4/4. It'll be, a 6 mana 4 or 6/4 when it attacks. So it's always good. So, last parts of the arm race. Brianna, the Demigogju, I don't know. It's a legendary creature, bird, warlock, flying. Whenever a player attacks one of your opponents, if that opponent has more life than another one of your opponents, that attacking player draws a card, and you put 2/1/1 counters on a creature you control. So, basically, you attack an opponent, you put 2 counters on it. Okay, wait. Okay, yeah. So they draw a card, you put the counters. and then if you attack, you draw a card and put the counters. So for the most part, when she's on the field, your opponent attacks your other opponent, they draw a card, you put counters. And then it gets back to your turn, and maybe this is like I don't know, like a 5/7. You attack. Now it's a 7/9, and you attack an opponent and draw a card. So it can be very helpful. Orzhov Advocus is the next one. Both of these actually did come in the same precon. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player may put two counters on a creature they control. If a player does, that creature can, or that, if a player does, creatures that player controls cannot attack you or planeswalker you control until your next turn. So you're always going to put the counters because you would never attack yourself. And your opponents can put counters, but when they don't put counters, this is very good actually because you know they're going to attack you and you know you can respond by then because this will be during your upkeep. So you'll know what to do and you'll have mana open. Maybe you want to remove it. Like, hey, you have creatures, but you didn't put counters, so I'm just going to ward wipe or I'm going to do something. And then we have Xantia, Sleeper Agent. 3 mana, 5/5. Enters the battlefield under an opponent's control that you get to choose. Uh, it attacks each combat and, if able, and cannot attack its owner or a planeswalker its owner's control. And for 3 mana, its controller loses 2 life, and you draw a card, and then anyone can activate this. So for the most part, you give them a 5/5 attacker that has to attack. They make enemies maybe, and you can keep pumping mana into it to draw cards, draw cards, draw cards, and that player loses life. You draw a card, and it goes on and on and on. So we're setting up our defenses now. So for the most part, if politics doesn't work, sometimes we just really need to protect ourselves. So there are a lot of enchantments in here. So Sphere of Safety is in here, 5 mana for an enchantment. Creatures cannot attack you or a planeswalker you control unless they pay X for each of those creatures, where X is the number of enchantments you control. So for the most part, we don't really have any planeswalkers, so that part don't bother with, unless we gain control of one somehow. So Sphere of Safety, usually it's like 1 mana they have to pay if it's by itself. But as soon as you get a second enchantment, it's 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And with the rest of these uh, on the page right here, it can get even crazier because with Propaganda and Ghostly Prison, they're the same card except one's blue, one's white. And creatures cannot attack you unless they pay 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. So it's the same card, but just blue and white. And they're both enchantments, and so if you have all these on the battlefield, your opponent has to pay 7 to attack you with one creature. So I'm going to assume if you have all 3 of these, your opponents very rarely are going to attack you. And they would also need that mana during combat, so they couldn't do it during the battle phase or whatever, or you know what I mean. Um, so attacks, I guess, like they have to declare on attackers, which they might not have if they have infinite mana that drains away eventually. So even if they have infinite mana, sometimes they just can't attack you. Like, oh, I make infinite creatures, infinite mana, infinite all this. Sometimes it just doesn't matter. We have more defenses. So we have Pramicon Sky Rampart. For a blue, a red, and a white. It has its legendary creature wall that has defender and flying. Enters the battlefield, choose left or right, and then players can only attack an opponent in the chosen direction, and planeswalkers controlled by that opponent. So if there's a creature deck to your right, you would choose right because then that opponent cannot attack you, and you could attack them. But you usually want to pick the direction where you're going to get attacked the least, because you really want to set up for the most part with this deck. Um, and then we have Windborn Muse. It's pretty much 4 mana for a 2/3 flying creature that has the same ability as Propaganda, Ghostly Prison. Creatures cannot attack you unless they pay 2, 2 mana. Then we have our Building the Army. So these are less friendly cards or defense cards. They can be used for defense though. Assemble the Legion is a 5 mana enchantment for 3 red white. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put a counter on it. Then put a 1/1 red white soldier creature token with haste onto the battlefield for each counter on it. So your first upkeep 1, second 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So if you can stall the game out until like this gets like 7 counters, you're getting a lot of haste guys. And if you have benefits like other cards that put counters on each creature, or you copy this, it can get pretty out of hand. Sandworm Convergence is a 8 mana, 6 and 2 green for an enchantment that creatures with flying can't attack you or a planeswalker you control. So that's very good. A lot of times I've used this and creature decks just concede because they don't have an answer for it. Um, Especially if you have ways to respond to them. At the beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 green worm creature token. So you're usually using this to also prevent being attacked. It's also pretty funny because a lot of times people will have effects that give all their creatures flying. So I've seen slivers before. You play this, oh well, now I have to remove my flying haste sliver to attack you. That feels probably pretty bad, I would imagine. They'd have to search for something or do something. They had to like, jump through a hoop because of this card, and that's a good thing. That's what we want. Um, which means that our other opponents are probably going to die faster. Which is a bit of a consequence of this deck. Is a lot of times we're killing our opponents by making them kill each other better. So here is I'll take that. So we want our opponent's things sometimes because they're pretty good, but we don't want to be too mean. So we're going to be playing Perplexing Chimera. 5 mana for a 3/3 enchantment creature, Chimera. When an opponent casts a spell, you exchange control of Chimera and that spell, and if you do, choose new targets. So you give them Chimera, you get control of that spell. Um, and you can choose new targets. So if it's a removal spell, maybe I want that removal spell and I want to switch it from my enchantment to your enchantment. Things like that. It, so it's a pretty good card for sure. Narset's Reversal, 2 blue, so that this might be one of the more problematic cards to cast for you sometimes. Uh, but when you do cast it, it feels pretty good. So it's an instant. You copy target instant or sorcery spell and return it to its owner's hand, and then you choose new copies for it. So a lot of times, an opponent will play a big flashy instant or sorcery. You return it back to their hand, so they have to recast it, and then you get to cast it basically. And a lot of times you can also use this on your card. So if you want to get another ability triggered off of it, or just another, like, because if you have a demonstrate card, you could copy it, and then still get Narset's Reversal. Um, Actually, now that I think about it, I gotta make sure that works. Because I think it's when it's cast. Just want to make sure. When you cast this spell, you may copy it, yeah. So as it's being cast, not when it resolves. So you can Narset's Reversal, then copy the demonstrated card, um, return the demonstrated card back to your hand, and you'd still get one of the copies. You wouldn't get both, but you'd still get one, and another opponent would get one. Fractured Identity, you exile a non-land permanent, and each other player, other than its controller, creates a token copy of it. So for the most part, this is better one-on-one because you get rid of their thing and you create it. But in multiplayer, let's say you remove a problematic combo piece, um, and a lot of times the other opponents don't combo off with it. Um, and maybe sometimes you want to even get rid of your own thing. So you do your doubling mana card. Now you have uh, I don't know, a million mana. You have a million mana now because everyone has a million mana. But during your turn, you get to choose when that happens. But then also maybe you want to do the card draw. So now everyone draws like 4 cards in their upkeep. Maybe you want to be even more beneficial, you know? So this can help a lot with that. Seaborn Muse. Okay, well I guess I should explain this category first. Long live the king. So for the most part, this is more about we're playing Kenrith. His abilities cost mana, and he has abilities that we want to use and abuse. So we're going to play a little bit of cards in there. These are more filler. You could get rid of them, and their Seaborn Muse is a budget cut if you want. Um, so it's 5 mana for a creature spirit. Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. And that means your lands as well, which lets you pump mana into Kenrith's ability. Will Breaker. Whenever an opponent's control, so it's a 5 mana 2/3 wizard, human wizard. Whenever an opponent's creature becomes a target of a spell or ability you control, you gain control of it for as long as you control Will Breaker. So this is a great target to bring back with Kenrith, and with one of his abilities, to the green one, to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. You can continuously do that for 2 mana to gain control of all their creatures. This could force them to sack their creatures. This could force them to remove Will Breaker, a removal they probably would have used on something else. And then we have Zerta, the Dawnbreaker, or Dawn Waker. So it is a 1 and then hybrid red white 2 times for legendary creature elemental fox, and then it can be your companion, but we're not doing companion. Abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate, and it can't reduce it less to 1 mana. And then you can pay 1 mana, tap it, and target creature can't block this turn. That part really does not matter. I've never seen anyone ever use that on this card. No, I really can't think of it, even in standard, when it was in standard. But you really want to make your Kenrith's ability less, so that draw 2 is now 2 mana. That gain control of a creature is 1 green, or things like that. So for the most part, that's why we have him in here, is because he just reduces the cost of Kenrith's ability and makes it way better. Because why not? These are cards that are just good. They are a little bit like they do help a little bit with your like um, other strategies, and they work at making your like flavor a little bit better. So clever impersonator is more for copying. So it's a 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue creature shapeshifter, but it's usually going to enter the battlefield as whatever. Because when it enters the battlefield, it enters the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. So this cannot copy lands, but it can start copying things like their creatures, if that's really what you want to do. If you want to do your own enchantment too, it's also really great. Um, he's just a clone effect for anything that isn't a land. Um, you can double your sphere of safety now that you pay 4, at least if you just have those two. Um, Maybe double your mana thing. It's really good. And doesn't give your opponent anything. That's kind of, or it doesn't really benefit your opponent too much. Um, and then Pier's Whim. 4 mana for a 3 and 1 green. For each opponent, choose friend or foe. Each friend searches their library for a land card, puts on the battlefield tapped, then shuffles their library. Each foe sacrifices an artifact or enchantment they control. So you usually are probably just going to always choose yourself as friend and everyone else as foe. For the most part, you're really just going to want to use this to ramp and then remove an artifact or enchantment that each opponent controls. They get to choose though, so it is sacrificed. Um, and if you really want to be nice to that guy who's hurting off, and you say, "Hey, look, I could make you remove your arcane signet, but I already know you're not doing well in lands. I'll let you search for a land, but you do something for me." That could help. There isn't really too much I could really put these two cards in a category with in this deck, but both of them very much fit in the deck. And they are cuttable if there are better cards that are printed down the line, or any cards you guys suggest down in the comments below. I'll take a look and consider them. But there are other cards that I would probably cut more for budget because of the Long Live the King cards. These are cards I'd rather just be playing in a strictly Kenrith deck rather than playing it in here, but they do work pretty well for it because of his abilities. You're using him as your commander anyways because he's a very friendly card. This is if we have to. This is like our nuclear option. If we need to win the game, we need to find a way to do it. And like if a game's going on forever, each opponent keeps killing each other, or it's just me and another opponent, I want some card that says win the game for us because sometimes we just can't do it on our own without these. Happily Ever After is a 2 mana and or 3 mana, 2 and 1 white for an enchantment. It enters the battlefield. Each player gains 5 and draws a card. So we draw a card, they draw a card, we gain life, they gain life. At the beginning of our upkeep, we have to have 5 colors among permanents we control. We have to have 6 or more card types among permanents we control and card types in our graveyard. And our life total has to be greater than or equal to our starting life total, and we will win the game. But it has to make it back to our upkeep. We have to have all of our permanents not touched, basically, because we need 5 colors, which is sort of difficult because we don't really have that many black creatures that we really control that often. We do have a few, and we can use Kenrith's ability to bring them back right before this ability triggers, but chances of us getting back to it can be pretty risky. And it's just such a hard card to win with, but if you can win with it, it'll be funny. It'll be awesome. And I've seen decks run, well, they're better decks than this one. Definitely win with it much easier if you have like a 5 color commander that has 5 colors in its cost. And then we have Approach of the Second Sun. If it was cast from our hand and we cast another spell, named it from our named it, even if we just cast it, we win the game. So so how it really works is the first time we cast it, it can get countered. We turn it back to the graveyard, cast it again. We just win the game, even if the second one gets countered. Or no, the second one has to make it. But if the first one gets countered, and then we cast the second one and it resolves, we win the game. Also, um, if we don't win with it, we have to put it seventh from the top, and then we gain 7. So it could be pretty far down in our library, but it is a clock at least that our deck usually doesn't run. And it's usually seen from a while away. So that's why I like these because they're not too evil, but they are win conditions in the end that we definitely desperately need. We do have board wipes. So Shatter the Sky is like Wrath of God, except creatures can be regenerated. So I'll just read it. Each player who controls a creature with power 4 or greater draws a card, then destroy all creatures. So usually most people are drawing a card, especially the ones getting affected the most from this. And you really just want this more as a way to get rid of the board. You really need to get rid of it. And it's a nice way to not have anyone feel too bad about it. Promise of Loyalty. Each player puts a vow counter on a creature they control and sacrifices the rest. Each of those creatures cannot attack you or a planeswalker you control for as long as it has a vow counter on it. So you board wipe, and then you let them keep the creatures they want the most. And if those creatures happen to be attacking creatures, they can't attack you at all for the rest of the game. For as long as they're on the battlefield or they haven't been flickered or something else. Yada yada. So we're going to the boring part. Doesn't really have anything to synergize with the deck. It's just ramp. So Farseek is a 2 mana, 1 and a green. You search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain. So pretty much any basic but forest in this deck, and put it on the battlefield tapped, and then you shuffle your library. So your main goal is just, you know, just get a basic land from it. You can't really search anything else. In other decks, this would be way, way better, but for the most part, it's just a fast ramp spell that we would really like. We have Rampant Growth. It's the same, except we can search for any basic, so it's strictly a better version of that in our deck. Chromatic Lantern is 3 mana for an artifact that makes all of our lands tap for any mana color, and it can tap for any mana color of 1 color. So it's really good because fixes our mana completely. We don't have any mana color problems, and it ramps us a little bit, which is pretty important in a 5 color deck. But for the most part, we won't desperately need it to the point where if we don't have it, we'll be sad. But we'll be happier to see it because it'll make our lives much easier when it comes to tapping mana. We have Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. They both do the same thing. You search your library for 2 lands, or 2 basic lands, reveal them, put 1 into your hand and 1 onto the battlefield tapped, and then you shuffle your library. Not much else to say other than that. Um, Circuitous Root. So it's a 4 mana sorcery, 3 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and or gates, and put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So gates are the reason why some of our cards say search for a land. It's because we're searching for gates, and that is our third win con, which I'll show you here now. And that's a lot of gates. So we got Maze's End. Maze's End itself is not a gate. You cannot search for it with Circuitous Root, but you can search for the other cards that work with it. Maze's End enters the battlefield tapped. It taps for 1 colorless mana, and for 3 mana and tapping it, we can return it to our hand, search our library for a gate, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle our library. Then, if we control 10 or more gates with different names, we win the game. So we're running 11 gates in the deck. We have Gateway Plaza, which unlike the rest of the gates I'm about to show you, works like similar cards in the deck we have. It enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, we sacrifice it unless we pay 1 mana. But if we do get this on the field, it can tap for any mana color, which is very beneficial for us for mana fixing. And we're already a slow deck. That's more for helping everyone else, anyways. We have Azorius Gateway. Um, and so most of these are going to be 2 colors. So this is enters tapped. It's a gate, and it taps for a white or a blue. And then we're going to go to the other ones, which we'll do pretty fast. So Orzhov does black, white, red, white, green, white, uh, blue, black, blue, red, blue, green, black, red, black, green, red, green, and that's all the gates. And then would you like to pay the one? So just like the other gate earlier, these all are basically the exact same card. They all might have different names, but they're basically the same card. They're not good. That's why they're all commons and stuff like that. Um, they all enter the battlefield tapped. You have to pay one or sacrifice it, and they tap for any mana color. So that's that. We have more mana fixing because that's what we needed. We have Exotic Orchard. It taps for a land of any opponent's colors. So if we're ever going up against an opponent with um, a land that taps for any color, our Exotic Orchard taps for any color. If we're going up against an opponent that taps for only white, we're actually okay with that. It's not great, but we just think of this as more of a plains in our deck. And it's not tapped too, so this is always just a pretty decent card, especially in 5-color decks. It's usually just an auto include because um, you just get like you get one or two mana colors untapped. It's not guaranteed what you'll get, but at the very least, drawing this doesn't feel too bad. And we have Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse. Both of these are very similar as well. They're lands. You tap it to sacrifice them, and then you search for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then you shuffle your library. So we're going to go to the next part, and then we'll go to basic lands after this. So enough said. These cards are pretty much basic. They're in every commander deck for the most part, except for certain decks, but I'm not going to talk about those now. So we have Soul Ring, 1 mana, taps for 2 mana. Pretty much just why wouldn't you add that into your deck? Ramps you really fast. Arcane Signet, 2 mana, taps for any color of your commander's identity. I know I put enough said, but I'm actually talking about them. And then Command Tower. You tap for a color of any color of your commander's color identity. So these are mana ramp, mana fixing, and um, that's all there really is to say about it. They're kind of boring cards, but you always want to add them to your deck, especially 5 colors. Back to basics. So these are our basic lands. These are the last bits, and these are always usually pretty free. If you have to buy them, I don't include them in the cost. Uh, that's really up to you. You could even get these nice ones. You can get probably people would even probably let you just print them if you wanted to, no matter what. It doesn't matter. But we're running 4 plains because plains is our second most used color in the deck. 3 islands because island and or blue and red would probably be close to second in our deck. Swamp because we're running 2 swamps because we're running very little black in our deck, and we're running 3 mountains because it is tied with blue for being around the same how much we're using it, and 5 forests because we are running a lot of ramp that's green, and we want to be able to get that green pretty early on so we can keep ramping and keep going. So for the most part, that's what that's there for. It's not nothing else to really say about it other than that. And I think that should be all. Yep. Let's go back real quick so we can see something. Let's go back to the beginning. Whoop. So for the most part, that is the deck. Political hugs. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I probably should just repeat the last slide at the end. That's what I'm probably going to do. That's a good idea. I'm going to say that during the outro. Why not? Just waste more of you guys' time on a deck that isn't that good. But if you did make it to the end, I hope you guys could show some support. This deck, did take a little bit longer. Um, not to make, because for the most part, this was pretty easy to make. A lot of the cards, uh, you once I realized I was looking at these cards and I was seeing a lot of them that helped your opponents out, and they're very cheap. They're very fun though, and that's the thing I liked about them. This is much more of a fun deck than one that you're gonna win with. And if you do like though, or if you do like and follow, subscribe or whatever, I'd appreciate it. And let me know any suggestions on what I could do better. I already know a few, so don't worry. I know some of them. If it's bad enough, I probably already know what I needed to do. But I hope you guys enjoy. And then just let me know. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a good one. Bye.